Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, everybody. This is Mark Graban. Welcome to episode 341 of the podcast. It is May 15th, 2019. I like every episode of the podcast, but I am particularly excited that I had a chance to talk with today's guest. He is Dr. Rob Hackett. He is an anesthesiologist in Sydney, Australia. And I've seen Rob's work in the news and on social media. He's been known around the world for his role in what's now called by some the TheatreCapChallenge. It's a method for improving communication and thereby improving patient safety and outcomes. And as we talk about today, Rob had the idea of writing his name and his role on his surgical cap with a sharpie because this would be helpful in the operating room. Eventually, he and others have gotten printed caps made. You can see a picture of this if you go to leanblog.org/341. Now, I posted about Rob on LinkedIn. It spurred a ton of discussion. There have been more than 200,000 views. And as I wrote there, Rob has unfortunately been trolled, threatened, and bullied for this seemingly benign and obvious improvement idea, both in the workplace and online. It seems that it's interesting to see that outsiders to healthcare and those who are new to medicine seem to find an idea like this to be obviously helpful. They're not threatened by it, but those who have been in healthcare the longest seem to struggle most to accept it. So, even with all this, I appreciate Rob's perspective that those who oppose this idea, for whatever reason, probably aren't bad people. They just have a different view and probably some old habits or cognitive biases that they're stuck in. So, the interview here goes for over an hour. I think it's really interesting listening. One thing I'd like to do is produce a shorter audio piece that's more like an NPR news story. So maybe I'll end up publishing that here on the feed, and that becomes more shareable. There are a lot of sound bites that I'm going to share online in different ways. But if you go again to leanblog.org/341, there's a full transcript for this episode. You can find links to Rob's website, which is psnetwork.org. where you can search social media for hashtag TheatreCapChallenge. There are videos and all sorts of other things on the webpage. So as always, thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear past episodes about healthcare improvement and other topics, or if you'd like to subscribe, you can go to leancast.org. So we're joined today by, again, Dr. Rob Hackett. Rob, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning from Australia.
I appreciate you being up so early before your day's work to have the conversation here. Can you introduce yourself? Talk a little bit about your professional background, your career in medicine, just to kind of help set some perspective.
Yep, Mark. I'm from the UK originally, near Liverpool. So grew up in the NHS. Studied medicine in Sheffield. Did my first year as a house officer in Sheffield in the UK, and then came over to Australia for what was supposed to be a year. That was back in '98. I met my now wife after about 2 weeks and ended up staying. So, then started a career sort of in anaesthetics at the start of 2000. And my work now is based around Sydney. I work in 8 different hospitals. One's a major public hospital in Sydney and 7 private hospitals of different sizes. I have no formal training whatsoever in ergonomics. I'm going to use the term ergonomics from now on, trying to avoid the term human factors. But my fascination for patient safety really started probably around 2008 after going to a very upsetting death of a young lady who happened to be the daughter of a theatre nurse. She'd had a baby herself 3 months earlier. She died from an air embolus from a central line being inserted, and everyone involved in a resuscitation sort of knew her personally. After an hour of trying, we never got her back. So it's a pretty high motivation and driver in my life. The other thing is as a junior or as a fellow towards the end of my training, breaking down the door of a colleague who'd taken her own life as well. Took an overdose of propofol. Those things motivate me. They drive me. They are certainly there in the background. And yeah, being exposed to some presentations by some people like Terry Fairbanks, who works for MedStar. He's a system safety expert, and he says the quickest way to become psychotic is to understand system safety and then go and work in healthcare. I can completely appreciate where he's coming from. And that was probably back in 2015. And since then, I've just been getting myself in more and more trouble. But at the same time, learning more about how to drive change in the industry, and I'm able to fall back on and interact with so many people from all over the world who are instilling me with new ideas and new thoughts. And yeah, I certainly feel that I can see a completely different way forward for healthcare, and we're really at an embryonic stage of it, a healthcare that does become a lot more efficient and works in the favour of our patients. At the moment, we have a front line where the environment only becomes more complex every day. The more complex it is, the greater the risk of error. And with those errors, then we're in trouble. And also the other motivation is from trying to introduce a safety change probably about 4 years ago now, and pushing it hard, and eventually being pulled into a room and having my career and my livelihood threatened. And then the realization that, as a senior consultant anaesthetist at that stage, that individually, we don't really stand a chance trying to introduce the changes that need to happen for ergonomic science to be introduced into the industry. So we really need to work together as a team of teams is where I'm coming at. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah. So before talking about some of the solutions, and including the TheatreCap idea that you've had, can we talk a little bit about some of the causes? In the lean methodology, we try to make sure we understand the problem and the scope of the problem and the causes. But can you talk about, from the data and things that you've seen, some of the primary causes, and including miscommunication? How does that, what does that lead to?
Okay, so there is good data that 70% of errors are due to communication problems. I suppose I tend to see things differently. I don't tend to look so much at what caused this issue. What I'm really looking at is how can we improve? And I just look at the environment that I'm in and look at the inefficiencies and the bad equipment and the poorly designed equipment, the poorly designed systems that surround us. How can we simplify those things? How can we standardize those things? We work in a highly policy-driven industry. Every hospital, even every department, seems to have. They may even have. Every department in every hospital may even have 5 or 6 revisions of the same policy document telling us how to do our jobs properly, and that is just insane. It's like driving around, and every town or every road that you drive down has a different set of road rules. And it's completely bonkers. But that's the best we seem to be doing at the moment in healthcare, and to try and push back against that is really, really difficult, because it comes from a top-down, ingrained thinking amongst all of us in the industry that this is how safety is done. And unfortunately, we are resistant to hearing things from elsewhere. There is a whole scientific discipline yet to be introduced into the industry. So, as far as, looking at sort of what leads to those mistakes, it's not really so much focusing backwards. It's looking forwards, like what can we improve? What can we improve? And when you open your eyes to this, it does drive you mad, because, I'm surrounded in many of my hospitals by bad design that I know is killing people. An example, and I take it to those levels, is the oxygen cylinders that we're currently utilizing in pretty much all the hospitals internationally. In the UK, there were 6 reported deaths and 400 near misses just because of the design of these oxygen cylinders. There's like 4 or 5 things that suggest to you that the oxygen cylinder is turned on. Even when it's actually turned off, you can even hear like a hiss of gas coming out of the cylinder, reassuring you that it's turned on when it's actually turned off. Yet we're well aware of this design issue, yet we do not have an industry that can remove that issue. In aviation, they've obviously just grounded some of the Boeing planes. These oxygen cylinders will have killed way more people than the Boeing planes, but we can't do anything about it and push on an individual level to try and change that. You will be taken out.
So I think, we can, it's sad to hear, we talk more about that more in the context of the theater caps. And so maybe when we transition to that of the idea that you had, where the spark of it was, it's kind of a visual solution. So I'll put pictures on the blog post for the episode, but let's kind of walk through, I'll let you tell the story of what, this seemingly simple, really innovative practice is.
Yeah. Well, it really was, obviously the ergonomics thinking, but it was really sparked by the event where, I was brought into this room trying to introduce another obvious safety change that, I actually sent out a survey. 48 out of 50 of my colleagues wanted that safety change. None of them were prepared to stand up and push for it. I found all the evidence, presented it in a cost beneficial way, but it just wouldn't happen. And then I was brought into this room eventually, and the CEO of the hospital, the head of my department, and the head of critical care, for an hour. I had a support person there with me. I was suspicious that something like this might happen, so I luckily taken someone with me. For an hour, I was, attacked, verbally attacked. At one point, the head of the critical care department looked me in the face, pointed at me, and he said, "I don't care who you are or what you do, but if you do anything like this again, you are out." And I was like, wow. And I walked out of that meeting and I thought, wow, this is a real worry. Here I am, a senior consultant anaesthetist, trying to drive a change, obviously better for patient care, and they will go to these levels to maintain the status quo. What do you do? And then it was like a year of deep thinking, deep learning, had to read more, find out more about myself. And there was a book that I always wanted to read, but never really wanted to read because of the title, Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's an awful title to a book, but it just made a lot of sense. It's over 100 years old. There's a whole chapter in there on the importance of names. And it also dawned on me that we do have this checklist from Atul Gawande. It's very poorly performed. In many hospitals, there is a tick box on there, and it's probably the most poorly performed part of the actual form, which says all staff members introduce themselves to one another by name and role. So, hospitals throughout the world will be ticking this box. and the actual procedure's not performed. It's been brought into a culture that's not used to it. But despite that, I'm really struggling to remember the names of people, and we'll be going to these arrest situations, and there I am sort of coordinating 40 people whose name and role I just don't know. And I know it's an inefficient thing, and I know patients will benefit a lot more if I am able to coordinate it better. And I was literally just running to work one day, and that's when it dawned on me, we have to write our name and role on our hat, because it's the last place that we've really got. It's the last bit of real estate. So, I mean, John Norman's The Design of Everyday Things. It's another book that's influenced me. You have to design things based on the constraints of your environment. So the constraint of our environment in theatre is, that we cover our tops with sterile and warm gowns. Lanyards are put down tops. Any badges that are on your top, they just become covered up. So visually, the people that are around us everywhere, you can't see their name and role. So on their person, there's actually even a policy that we're supposed to do this. So when I thought about it, it became more and more obvious. But the thing that was also in the back of my mind was I knew the resistance that there would be to it. It's like, here is something that's obviously better for patient care. The patients are going to be able to see this. Everyone will be able to see this. And what they'll also be able to see is the resistance that comes to it, despite it being better for patient care. Patients will start to realize that healthcare is not aligned with their best interest, and it will be a huge advertisement for the safety movement and ergonomics in itself. And that is why, out of all the projects that I push this very, very strongly. I see it as a huge advertisement of a different way to go. And it's been brilliant. The way that we work as a team of teams, we're able to, because of social media, social networks, we've got an 80-strong team, with professors of communication. Theodore Grancharov is in the, pitches in every now and then. He's got the OR Black Box, the video recorder in theatres. We've got all sorts of people from all sorts of walks of life. And working in this way as a huge collaborative team gives us a lot of stamina. There are people generating data points from lots of different hospitals throughout the world and just sending it in, and we're just putting it in one place and then sending it back out to everyone in the world and say, look, have a look at this, read this new bit of data. Just recently, we've received a $30,000 grant to run some simulation and other assessments. So, for me, at times I sort of step outside the box and think this is absolutely insane that we have to go to this level to show people something that is so bleedingly obvious. But unfortunately, that is the nature of healthcare and how we've been conditioned over the years. You have to show the evidence. You have to show the evidence. It's just, show the evidence that displaying your name and role makes it easier for people to understand your name and role. Like, how ridiculous are we? Come on, let's move on. And then it sort of sends a message to people. It's not evidence, is it, that you need? It's something else. It's something else that's going to tick your buttons on a personal level and allow you to introduce this change. And I think probably one of the other massive drivers that we'll see is the more people do it, the more other people will become comfortable in doing it. It almost becomes a viral phenomenon and a huge advert for ergonomics and the introduction of ergonomics into healthcare. And it's been great because it's allowed me to interact with people like yourself, Mark, as well, and these interactions is where I see it at. I sense your frustrations as well at times, and a lot of others' frustrations with an industry that is resisting these changes to the detriment of all of us. And it's, everyone wants patient safety to improve. And I think the more that we start to move in this right direction, the more people will become comfortable with it, the more it will become mainstream, the more it will become the norm, and the more that we'll all benefit. So, I think it just takes a lot of constant agitation from a bigger and increasing group. So we will get there. Yeah, we will get there.
So what, it's kind of mind-boggling. I'm trying to think even how to ask the question. Like what? So the idea is as simple and important and seemingly effective. An idea putting your name and your role on your head so everybody can see it, not have to walk to the whiteboard or and as you've laid out the case that improving. Knowing people's names helps improve communication, which helps reduce errors, which saves lives. How could people be opposed to this? Like, I'm curious if you can tell very specific examples of the first time you did this. What were some of the negative responses of what you were doing or what you were trying to encourage others?
Yeah. I knew they would come. And I knew, and they still do come, and they come in droves. And I'm threatened legally. I've been bullied, intimidated. I'm trolled on social media. But I knew it was there. And the other great thing is it exposes this culture for others to see, so other people can see how bad these things are. But basically, one of the surveys that we're about to publish, over 1,000 people, basically demonstrates there's a lot of support of it for the initiative. Patients in particular, 92%, they completely support it. They want us to do it. Frontline staff, 86.5%. And when you look at those that are new to healthcare, the nursing and medical students, it's almost unanimous. It's 100% of them want to do it. And the support is least from those who've been in healthcare the longest. Even then it only dropped down to 55%, but perhaps that's where you start to see that a big issue is these are the people with the greatest influence. And when you work in command structures, as we do in healthcare, that influence can be particularly strong. Within one of my hospitals, I am still not allowed to even present on the initiative. And the other great thing about the initiative is it's been able to narrow it down to a specific individual who's so vehemently resistant to the idea and intimidatory in his behavior. And he's surrounded by a group of people who are reticent to approach him because then, from below and above, because they see their careers will then be under threat as well. So the managers above him are fearful of approaching it, and even just as much as the people below. So this one individual is able to drive a whole culture throughout a whole theatre complex. And it's not just for this one initiative, it's for lots of other things. And one of the things that strikes me is this idea of cognitive dissonance. So if you accept change, then you have to accept that what you were doing before wasn't as good. And we work in a very emotive profession. People die at our hands. How dare you say that we weren't doing things well enough? How dare you say that? It's very, very, very offensive. And it is. So we resist change and we put up every possible obstacle that we can in resisting it. So things that are thrown up, it's going to cost, and then you show them it'll cost less. It's actually beneficial for the environment. The CAPS initiative, all these disposable caps. But one of my bigger hospitals will dispose 100,000 disposable caps a year. They're made from viscose. They're just really detrimental to the environment. Other things that are thrown up there, infection control. Well, infection control, the actual infection control group or specialty are so upset that they are often used as a barrier to resist change. They've actually published in a lot of their articles, that, the only benefit for hats, or theatre hats, is actually in stopping the shed of hair, and that's it, So you don't need to put a disposable cap on it all the time, but bang, it's there. It enters policies, blah, 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 and then you try and push back against those policies, and it's really, really, really hard. But so every single obstacle is put in the way, and then it's like, oh, you've got to show the evidence before this can be brought in, as well as another obstacle there. So all of these obstacles are put in the way, and then when you've got past all of those, it just turns to threats, intimidation, ostracization, bullying. All of these things are seen, and they can all be applied to any of these ergonomics initiatives as you try to bring them in. But the CAPS just helps really expose them for what they are. The other great thing about the CAPS is that because they've got such a visual nature, not only do they, when you get into an environment where people are wearing them, you actually feel a lot more comfortable as an individual to wear them. The other thing is it actually starts to expose those hospitals, those institutions that have a progressive, forward-thinking, patient-centered, patient-minded thinking. So Gloucester Hospital in the UK, for example, they've just gone and bought caps, name and roll caps for all of their staff. We're just working on a map at the moment as well of all the hospitals that have introduced the TheatreCapChallenge initiative at some degree within their hospital. There's a lot of support in the NHS in the UK. They've got a very sort of quality-driven, quality-minded sort of culture. And I think they may well lead the way on this, but it's also nice that some of my hospitals have started to take the initiative on as well. And I think, it will just see more and more with time. And I do like this idea of impacting on institutions' reputation to help drive change. And I think that's really what we are ultimately going to have to do as a group, as a general public, and allow the public to know that the hospital that they're walking into has a patient-focused, patient-centered culture and thinking. And I think just as, if you go to an Airbnb or if you get into an Uber, we're able to rate those. We need to look at this sort of idea of comparing hospitals and allowing frontline staff to have their input into comparing hospitals and everyone else as well. So the NHS has started doing this. They've started to do this a bit in New South Wales as well, creating league tables. At the moment, they're fairly subjective league tables, but we can make them objective for each of these projects that we're trying to drive. We can look at every equipment type out there. We can look at, and we can start to rate it much in the way. I'm not sure if in the US you do this, but in Australia and in the UK, they have energy efficiency ratings for all of the equipment or for fridges and domestic equipment. Yeah. But we can do something very similar collaboratively for all of the healthcare equipment that we interact with. How usable is this equipment? Now, I know in the US right now, a guy that works with Terry Fairbanks, Raj Ratwani, is going to Congress and presenting about the issues related to electronic health recording. He's put out a great video presenting on that as well. And they've started to grade how usable are the EHR systems, how well were they tested before they were brought to market. So the vast majority of the equipment and the systems that we're interfacing with hasn't been tested not only not usability tested, but not even tested properly. I mean, at the very top, not only is it inept, but it's also corrupt. I mean, for those who haven't watched The Bleeding Edge yet, you've got to watch that. You can start to see
documentary film.
Yeah, the documentary. You can start to see how sinister things are at the very, very top. And it's bad. It is really, really bad. I started to realize this again myself probably about 3 or 4 years ago. I was actually called to speak to the Australian Commission, and they were the ones that started to reveal this to me. We have in Australia, we have the TGA, which is your FDA equivalent. In the UK, they have the MHRA. They're all aligned and designed based on the FDA and work as the FDA do and just follow the FDA's lead. So I was trying to introduce some other obvious changes, and I said to the Australian guys at the Australian Commission, said, look, all of this seems to stop at the TGA. And they said, well, we're not surprised because they're completely funded by the companies that they're supposed to govern. And I glossed over what they said initially. And then I went back to look at it and thought, hang on, this is a real conflict of interest here. If we're trying to introduce safer equipment and safer systems and more usable equipment, then we need independent input into this. We can't be controlled by the companies. And unfortunately, that is what's going on right now. So to give you an example, one of the antiseptic solutions, chlorhexidine, there's been a series of ongoing cases of patients having it injected inadvertently, people mistaking it for local anesthetic or saline or other colorless solutions because it's so poorly colored. But there are companies that make it very, very vividly colored. The companies that make it poorly colored, so there were two. I got in touch with them. One of them, met up with me. They tried to understand what the issue was, and then they went, right, okay, we don't want to be involved in causing patient harm. We'll go back. Please do give us time. And they spent a year, and they managed to introduce a dye into their product so that we're less likely to inject it. They are still trying to get that product licensed, 3 years later through the TGA. In the meantime, another big company, like a big company, they just turned around and said, look, we don't care. We're TGA approved. It's just like, what? You don't care about this issue, and they don't, it's, unless we make them care, they won't care. Unless we start to impact on the reputation of these big companies, unless we start to stop buying from these big companies who refuse to listen to the front line when we want to introduce patient safety solutions, then they will not change. So we need to force their hand, and we can do that collaboratively. And perhaps right now that is my biggest threat. Like, these people will come at me as well next. So watch this space.
So, what I hear you saying is that the response or the if you will, resistance to the cap with name and role on it, it goes to deeper issues than that. You said earlier, if I heard you right, the people who speak out as being opposed to this simple innovation, or maybe exposing themselves as the people who are status quo defenders. And I'm curious, how much of that is just, power dynamics? As an engineer, it's hard for me to completely relate, but is it just that the more senior people just view improvement as a threat to their reputation that,
maybe there is a fear of losing some control. Maybe there is a fear of doing things in a different way. We have to overcome that fear within them. None of these people are bad people. No one's bad. Everyone wants patient safety to improve. We just need to understand how we've been so heavily conditioned in these environments. You know, even this one individual who in my own institution has, you know, threatened legal action against me. He's not a bad person. He's highly, highly dedicated to healthcare. He's highly, highly dedicated to looking after patients. He's an amazing person. And I see, you know, it is hardest for him to accept it more than anyone else. And he may die and never accept it. But if he is able to accept it, then, you know, my respect to him is greater than to anyone. It would be so hard. It's almost like telling someone they have to change religion. It's that culturally ingrained. And this is what we're up against. We are very, very strong cultural animals. We're very, very strong social thinkers. And to agitate against that, you really do expose yourself to a lot of threats and intimidation that will come your way. So it is difficult. But yeah, just quickly before I forget, just going back to the equipment issue, in the UK they have a company called Which, and in Australia they have a company called Choice, and they assess domestic equipment. I was fortunate enough to go and meet up with Choice magazine and go into their factories where they assess independently all the equipment that is used. And a really, really nice CEO walked me around. Everyone was, really good, positive frame of mind, and they were asking me why I was there. And at the conclusion of our meeting, the CEO said, "Look, I think you're where we were back in 1953." And that really hit me. It was just, I thought we were back in the 70s, but it's just dawned on me, we're back in 1953, but in a much worse situation. You know, there is no independent assessment of the equipment and systems. We need to bring it in. But unfortunately, we're working now on the front line in some of the most complex environments, which we really struggle to simplify. And another example that I'll touch on, because it's so ridiculously simple. And I know I've mentioned it to you, Mark, but I'll bring it up again, is the arrest alarm. So I've started timing how long it takes staff in theatre to find the arrest alarm. So every minute that goes by, the chance of a patient being shocked out of a shockable rhythm decreases by 10% every minute. So just in trying to find the arrest alarm, one of the staff members took 2.5 minutes. This is just one room. Took 2.5 minutes and then had to give up. They just couldn't find the arrest alarm. There were so many other objects, switches, lights, dials on the wall that looked like they could be an arrest alarm. It could end up being hidden behind a paper sheet, a pat slide. So this amazingly simple design at Monash Hospital down in Melbourne is just to draw a red stripe from the ceiling down, like a big thick red stripe of paint down to where the arrest alarm is. It's brilliant in its simplicity, but healthcare, it will take us years to bring something like that in right now. It's this is how bad healthcare is and how resistant it is to these things. So we need to change. So
you said that, the hospital where you're going to today, everyone's wearing the caps. There's one of your hospitals, I read from one of your other interviews, one of the hospitals where you've been barred from even talking about it. Can you maybe kind of share some of the kind of the details in that specific case?
But basically it's, before the initiative even had a hashtag, which the hashtag was started by a student midwife at the time, Alison Brindle, who is based in the UK. But probably about 6 months before that, I'd been walking around for a while with my name and role on my hat. I'd sent emails to senior representatives of the theatre to say, look, can we trial this at least? Give it a go. We don't have to force it on anyone, but let's just give it a go. See, and didn't hear anything back for months. Kept emailing, and eventually was told, yeah, we've just knocked it back. But I carried on doing it. There was a nurse in my theatres who also, within her own theatre, she got other staff to put their name and role on their hat with a bit of sticky tape. Then the senior nurse came down and insisted that they take them off, and told them that they looked unprofessional. So I got the senior nurse, when I heard about this, I got them to come into my anaesthetic bay and look through the window at the theatre that I was working at. I said, look, have a look at the people in there. Can you tell me their names? She could name 2 out of the 7. And I said, well, look, welcome to my world. This is the world that I'm working in, and you are stopping us from introducing something that would make that better. And they just walked away. You can't really combat that too much. So then what happened? We were putting pictures out on social media. My brother-in-law is a creative director in advertising. I've been telling him about this initiative for a while, but then Alison Brindle put the hashtag out, #TheatreCapChallenge, and she put a picture up, and I just thought, that is absolutely brilliant. That is so good. It reminded me of the ice bucket challenge that went around in America, and it's just
right.
Yeah, this is. I rang my brother-in-law, the creative director, straight away. I said, look at this. It's just happened. This will go off now. Watch this. And literally 3 days later, it was in the Times newspaper in the UK. 2 days after that, in the Sydney Morning Herald, and it's built and built and built and built and built from there. It's a bit of a slow burn, but yeah, it's great. But so when it was in the Times newspaper and in the Sydney Morning Herald, I then got in touch with the senior representatives at this hospital. Again, look, it's just been in the newspapers now. Can we trial it now? Again, we've discussed it at a meeting. It's been knocked back again. So this is, this is unfortunate. Constantly tried to introduce it and pushed in a gentle manner. I've actually received funding several times from different companies, and thanks to the companies that have given sponsorship and bought caps anyway for staff in these hospitals. And they've been allowed, and that no one stopped them from wearing them, which is good. And they've been allowed to wear them, and they want to wear them. But still, there's a lot of, I'd say within that hospital, probably 2 or 3% of people are wearing name and role caps within the theatre complex. And I feel that the biggest fear comes from staff knowing that it's not supported from above, and them seeing it as a threat to their own careers if they do this thing, which is obviously better for patient care. So it's like we're torn. There's this,
right.
There's this, what do they call, a moral injury that is created from, we're sort of slaves to at least 3 masters. One is our career and our family and our jobs. Another one is to our employees and to what our employees want, and another one is to doing what's best for our patients. And when these things don't align, then it causes moral injury. And what you're seeing here is people, instead of doing what's best for patient care, they're doing what's best for what their employees tell them and what's best for them maintaining their careers because of what their employees tell them. So it's really, really difficult. And, I've carried on pushing, and it's led to eventually me being threatened with legal action recently. But luckily, I do find myself in a very unique position in that, there has been this exposure. It becomes very hard now to threaten me or push me out of a hospital because of the exposure that it will generate. But what not to do, and what I don't ever want to do, is to butt heads with these people. As I said, everyone wants the best for patient care. We just had different ways that we've been conditioned. And I think the way forward comes through understanding the motivations behind their thinking. Just gradually, if there are these people who are insistent that they will not change and do not change, then the best option then is to gradually take the influence away from them. So another great book that I've read recently is Our Iceberg is Melting. I'm not sure if you've come across that one.
Is that a Ken Blanchard book?
I can't remember the author off the top of my head.
There's a series of these little business fables. That's a John Kotter. That's a John Kotter book.
Yeah, it's a John Kotter. John Kotter, definitely. See, we're all bad with names. and this is reality, in the from this working group, we've basically got this data that after first introduction, humans only remember 30% of names when we're not distracted, and then we readily forget them. We are very, very bad across the board at remembering names. And the other thing that comes into it is that we become too embarrassed to ask again. We see it as almost an affront to others. Say, "Oh yeah, I forgot your name." So we daren't ask them. And also the other thing that's embarrassing is for people to come up to us and tell us what their name is if we've met them before, because it also suggests to the person that they haven't got a good memory. So here, my name is this. I know your memory's not very good. Here's my name. So there is this cultural aspect of why we just don't carry on sharing our name after we've met other people before. So yeah, John Kotter, great book. And it really is, this iceberg is melting concept, healthcare, unfortunately, adversity from medical error. And that, everyone sort of poo-poos some of the data out there, medical error being handed as the third greatest cause of death, and then it causes a ruckus, and people go, no, it's not. There's a real problem with the data, blah, blah, blah. What is very, very apparent is that adversity from medical error only appears to be increasing. And it makes complete sense to me that in this system of healthcare that we have, that would completely be the case. If every day we have a new piece of equipment or a new system introduced, and we have a constantly renewing workforce, then the environment just gradually becomes more and more complex. The more complex, the more likely we are to make mistakes. But unfortunately, at the moment, our response to these mistakes is to write another policy, send out another alert, create another education framework. That in itself then just introduces even more complexity into the system. So we just keep making more and more of the same mistakes. And unfortunately, going back to my first initial driver in this this central line, the air that had got in through the central line. Another thing that spurred me 4 years ago, I was given the raw data on the central line air embolus deaths from New South Wales, the state that I'm in. We'd had something like 51 cases with 6 deaths over a span of a year. They were just the reports. All of these cases completely avoidable. So I was approached by the Clinical Excellence Commission in New South Wales, and they said, look, do do you have any suggestions on how we can help fix this issue? And so I looked at the raw data. I could see how every single one of those cases happened, and it made a lot of sense to me. And then I sat down with them and said, look, do you have anyone who works as they would in the aviation industry who investigates this stuff? And they said, oh, yeah, we've just employed a human factors expert in healthcare. He's the first in Australia, a guy called Thomas Loveday. He was the first human factors, we'll call it ergonomics expert, to be employed in healthcare in Australia. He left 6-9 months ago. We have no ergonomics experts at all in healthcare in Australia. I think there's probably one or two in the whole of the NHS at this stage, and maybe a smattering in the US. What we do have is a lot of people who think they know what human factors is, but they probably don't understand it. They've never really been trained in it, and their understanding is certainly nowhere near these guys. I met up with this chap, Thomas Loveday, and a lovely guy, and I said, look, I think I've got a bit of an idea how we can fix this problem. I've brought together a lot of the forms that we have into a single form, just focusing on the salient issues. And I handed it to him, and he said, right, yeah, that's really good. What you want to do is take that to the nurses on the wards who are going to be interacting with it and get them to tell you how it will fail. And that's when it hit me. It's like, oh, wow, these people think completely differently to us. What is it? What do they know that we don't know? And there is a lot that they know that we don't know. And really, that's what I've been learning about over the last few years. With the Clinical Excellence Commission, eventually they put out a clinical focus report. In fact, I presented this within one of my presentations just 2 weeks ago to the registrars. I said, look, who's seen this clinical focus report? There's a room of 30 people, 30 anaesthetists within New South Wales. None of them had, and I don't expect that any of them will have done. This was the pièce de résistance. This was how, the Clinical Excellence Commission was going to stop this issue. No one's even seen it. There is so much information out there. Writing another policy or writing another document isn't going to have any impact on the front line. Right. I subsequently met up with the people from the CEC. I said, look, it's a great document. You do realise it will have no impact. And they looked a bit upset when I told them that. 6 months later, I bumped into a few of the people from that group at the train station. And I said, look, how many more deaths have you had over the last 6 months? And they couldn't actually say it, but the lady on the platform just held up her hand and said 5. So they'd had another 5 deaths within that 6-month period after releasing the pièce de résistance of how they were going to stop the problem. And no criticism to them; these are great people. But the other issue we have in healthcare is that healthcare governance or healthcare governors as individuals, they have a very finite lifespan. They move from one job to the next. Within the first year, 30% will have moved to another role. Their average lifespan is 3 years. There is no organizational or very little organizational memory in healthcare governance. All of the people that were involved in releasing that document have now moved on. They're not involved in that project, but I've continued it on through the Patient Safe Network. One thing that we did put out was a video and an animation video, a short one, and it just highlights the issue. And within that video, it says at least one person dies every day from this issue. And, from my reading and from the data that I've collected, I think it's actually worse. I think today somewhere between 3 and 7 people will die from a central line embolus
right
across the world. And every single one of those cases will be avoidable. And the simple interventions that we would be able to put in place to stop this, we still haven't put them in place. So, and one of the presentations that I give talks about this. The second presentation uses one of the simple interventions and the resistance to it to explain resistance within the industry that we're seeing with the caps as well. And it's really sad. It's really, really, really sad, that I work in an industry where I know people are dying because of our errors. And at the moment, we seem incapable of changing that. But there is a way forward, and I can see what it is. And it occupies pretty much all of my thinking space at the moment. But we will get there.
Well, there's a long, long history of changes taking 19 or 20 years to be adopted in healthcare, even things that seem so obvious in hindsight. There's a lot of things that are discouraging. I feel the same way. One thing that's very encouraging is just scrolling through Twitter and the hashtag TheatreCapChallenge and seeing the smiling faces of people with their name and role on their hat. Here's one I'm scrolling through. It actually says Deborah Lee, Chief Executive. So good, good for her. Leading by example, right?
Yeah, and that is great. So Deborah Lee, never met her, and this is, but she's the CEO, by the looks of things, of Gloucester Hospitals. They just bought caps for all of their staff within theatre. Another comment that came from that tweet was from an elitist down in Melbourne. It's like, wow, CEO in theatre. I've never even seen my CEO. I mean, and this is the reality. 25 years in healthcare, I have yet to have any manager at any level come to me and say, what is it that we can do to make your workplace better? That needs to change. And it's obviously changed in that hospital. They have a great culture. And I want people to see that. And I want our patients to see that. And I want them to know that you go to Gloucester Hospital, they have a progressive culture, and you are going to get much better care than anywhere else. And this is how we work. We start impacting on the reputation of institutions. If they're not doing these things, people will be able to see it, and your reputation is at stake here.
And lives are at stake.
And that's how, lives are at stake. Reputations of institutions are at stake, and this is how we will have to work for now until it becomes accepted part of healthcare. We will have to push quite aggressively and impact on hospitals' reputation until they bring ergonomics into place.
Well, I appreciate that you're pushing. I know the world is pushing back on you a lot of ways. Even just trying to scroll through pictures of smiling faces with hats, I see the people pushing back.
Yeah, the trolls that are out there. But this is what it's about. It's about exposing that negativity that exists out there. I've got a thick skin. I can understand. I can understand why these people are the way that they are, and I get that they're good people as well.
Good. And they're asking. They're good people, but my gosh, they're stuck. Hope we can help them. I mean, there's somebody pushing back, like, where's the evidence that proves this is a good idea? Well, where was the evidence that said not having the name on the caps was a good idea, right?
Yeah. And the reality is we have a ton of evidence, and I push it on to these people, but they'll still say, oh, we need more. And I could exhaust them with evidence. It's so obviously better, and I have no fear that running simulation studies will not show that this is better for patient care. It's so ridiculously obvious, but it just exposes. We've been ingrained in an evidence-based, conditioned practice, which, I'm completely supportive of evidence-based medicine when it's used appropriately. Evidence-based medicine was never designed to disprove basic science, and this is what these people are trying to do, and it's just being they're used as an obstacle to change. But no, I mean, whilst I talk about things often in a negative way, there is a lot of good, and it's, I know, thank God for social media, or thank goodness for social media, because I've been able to meet so many passionate people around the world who are, they're as passionate, if not more passionate than me, at driving this, and being able to connect with them and help drive this further and further is just brilliant. It's it will change. And, if we didn't have the internet, then we wouldn't be able to change healthcare in the way that we're about to. So, massive kudos to everyone out there that's pushing for improved patient care, because it will come, and it will come into the industry. And, my hat goes off to everyone. My hat goes off to everyone who's helping push forward. The patients, managers, the manufacturers that are coming on board, other healthcare staff. It's great to see it start to move. So it's,
Well, I want to really thank you, Rob, for being here today and sharing what you've been doing, what you've been facing, what you continue to fight for. So I appreciate that. I know you have to get off to the surgical theater, so I don't want to hold you back from that. But I want to encourage people to go visit Patient Safe Network, psnetwork.org. Rob, as a final thought, can you share a little bit about that organization?
Yeah, but basically it's a network. Anyone can be involved. What we're just pushing back out and driving are just great ideas and great change and great improvements. And there's tons, and it just comes. I mean, people send it to me, and we generate collaborative groups that focus particularly on that project, and then we just push it out and try and drive it everywhere. I mean, all of these projects will have international resonance, and sometimes all it takes is just a couple of completely passionate people, and they can drive things really far. There's a big change just about to happen in emergency departments and elsewhere. We're looking at something called end-tidal oxygen monitoring. The data that we've got from this working group, pretty much driven by two passionate individuals, Dr. Matt Oliver, who's in Sydney, and Dr. Nick Caputo, who's in New York. These guys have never met each other, but yet we've been driving this project for over sort of 3 years, and it's so fascinating seeing this go. And what we've shown is probably at least less than 25%, probably less than 10% of patients outside theatre right now across the world are being pre-oxygenated, given sufficient oxygen before they're put off to sleep and have a breathing tube in. And just by allowing people to see the end-tidal oxygen, we've able to flip that, completely the other way. And now 90% of people, and it's just are being pre-oxygenated properly. And it's just, all it takes is a few passionate people, and what the network gives are great tools for those projects to be driven. Networks through connections through other people throughout the world, connecting with advertisers, connecting with the manufacturers, connecting with everyone, and just transparently keeping it out there and saying, look, this is where we're up to. Who knows where the next or where the amazing ideas are coming from? They can come from people who are not on the front line, anywhere. So we're able to tap into that, and it's just great seeing it grow. So, Mark, I really appreciate the plug, and that's very, very kind of you. And yeah, look, really appreciate what you're doing as well in the industry, and stick with it. It will get better and better.
Well, I hope so. So thank you for thank you for those words, and thank you for joining us here today. For the people listening, go to the blog post for this episode. There'll be all sorts of links and more that you can check out about our guest, Dr. Rob Hackett, and the others who are involved in this really important movement, not just around the theater cap, but around patient safety and improving healthcare. So, Rob, thank you so much. I hope you have a great day. Thank you for being up so early in Sydney.
No worries, Mark. My pleasure, mate. All the best.
You too. Thanks.
Okay, bye.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For Lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.